He stands on a black cliff where Pacific thunder gives the world a pulse, and hears a second ocean singing beneath the first older, swallowed. Wrong. The clear, the living memory of all waters shows him a tear stitched with famine noise and the silhouettes of bones the size of cities. If he ignores it, something with 1,000,000 hunger mouths will drink a world dry and learn how to drink the rest. Arthur Curry decides he will not be a king who let another ocean die. He drives Atlan's trident into the trench, and the sea inverts pressure, cold. A bell note like a harpoon through his skull, and the breach takes him. A sky that should be blue is instead a lid of iron sigils and re-entry fire. Ocean boils to cloud. Fragments of ships hammer the city-tiered coasts of Hydrafor, capital of a subsector that thinks itself immortal because it has not drowned yet. Sirens twist into hymns. 1 billion people look up and try to calculate how far a burning prow can fall before it stops being abstract. He arrives as a spear of gold in a storm shaft. His silhouette is a rune-scale mail, seaborne eyes, the trident whose cuts are lines in weather maps. He catches a cruiser spine with a wall of water, taller than its own hull. The wall lifts, flexes, sets it down like a mother setting a fever child on stone. Steel shrieks. Harbor spires bend and do not break. The ocean buckles, then obeys. In the flagship's command dome, Admiral Lethe Mara Vilka clamps 4 rings of bone and brass around her elbows and grows 20 years in one breath. Track the Xenos object. Her voice kills panic, does not cure it. Hydrafor is a naval city-state scaled up to a planet. It worships charts and debt, parade and hull metal. It swears fealty to distant Terra by exporting ships and suns. Now, every lumen feed fills with a man riding storm, making dams out of vacuum. He's redirecting impact trajectories, says a petty officer with her face lit by 1,000 icons. Not a drop touches Holy Harbor 6. Xenos, says the woman in black at the Admiral's shoulder. The rosette at her throat looks like a small sun spiked with thorns. Inquisitor Kestrel Sirai Ordo. Xenos watches without blinking. Or a witch, or a liar in human skin. Regardless, we will treat him as a weapon until he proves a friend. The oceans heave again. A slit like a vertical pupil opens in the upper atmosphere. Not warp lightning. Something biological. Chitinous. Learning the shape of the void. The first feeder tendrils of a Tyranid splinter fleet taste the ion snow and decide Hydrafor is sweet. Arthur feels the other ocean before he sees it. A mind ocean. The song of the Tyranid. It is a single voice pretending to be a choir. It has one word in it, and that word is eat. He hears it because he hears all waters. And this song spreads through blood, through the thin salt film on a child's lip, through cargo tanks, through tears. He bares his teeth. His focus splits. He turns a skyscraper-tall wave sideways, and the wave grabs a burning transport and kindly denies it the city. Cost shows up immediately. The trident is not a battery. It is a key, and the door resents being used. The shaft hums, and the hum bites. Hydrafor's ocean is alive and old, but it is not the clear. Every push here drags splinters of red static through his knuckles. He tastes iron warp backwash. He files it as the bill he will pay later, and keeps moving. Unknown storm-class entity has saved the petty officer's math, gives up on numbers, and uses metaphors. Millions? She sounds like she's confessing a sin. Open Vox, the Admiral says. Planetary to all. And you, Inquisitor, hold your censure until I have meat to hang it on. Arthur doesn't broadcast his name, because names become targets here. He says, hold inland. Clear Tier 3 harbors. Anything that floats and isn't nailed down, lash it. Brace for a living tide. His voice carries because water wants it to. The harbor hears. Fisher kayaks next to freighters obey the same physics. You presume command, says the Inquisitor, dry as a desert. He answers by turning the sea into a harness. A ring of foam the size of a hive spire stiffens, thickens, becomes a belt. He slides a crippled barge through an alley of cathedral cranes and parks it against a grain silo. He thinks of Atlantis, and how many times he has pointed the sea at a problem and hoped the cost his people paid was the last one. The second wave arrives. The sky splits proper. Ribs of void whale bioships knife out of nothing and begin to be local. Their hulls pulse with polyp farms and living guns. Smaller spores fall like lethal rain. The ocean takes them, and they do not drown. They drink. They breed. They make water into family. He wades out until the city behind him is a crown of stone. He sets the trident. He folds a pressure ridge into something with edges. When the first tyrannid feeder bloom surfaces a mouth like an orchard of knives, he cuts it with a line of vacuum. It falls in half, as if the world decided halves were fairer. "By the throne," someone whispers in the command dome. Not the Inquisitor. Even she has a voice that can be stolen. "Coordinate with him," the Admiral says. "Use him as we use a storm front. The fleet will anchor inside his wake. He may be the storm," says the Inquisitor. "And I hold a fleet," the Admiral says. "We will test whether storms take orders." Arthur feels the shadow and the warp wash over him like a parched wind. The ocean goes dull. The edges of life inside it blur, then hurt. He grits his teeth. He speaks to whales that Hydrofer pretends it does not have, and they answer with old vowels. He tells them to dive and wait. He tells everything with gills and patience to find the rock under the rock. He builds a cordon with water and will. Spore pods fall staccato on the beltline he made. He sweeps and makes them collide mid-air so their guts feed each other. He makes ice where there should not be any. He changes salinity until bioplankton that should be food becomes poison. The tyrannid listens, adjusts. It seeds enzymatic variations. The sea tastes like a lab. A pod breaks through his tricks and births a scythe-limbed beast with eyes like pulp-stuffed pearls. It screams out a signal that is not sound, and 3 more of its kind hit the harbor wall and run insect fast and boat empty. He meets the first with a wedge of water that hits at ankle height and turns it end over end. The second he freezes to the pavement. The third he cuts around the middle and shoves back to its siblings to tangle them in themselves. He does not look like a king. He looks like the ocean doing math. He pulls back. The shadow rakes him. He feels the clear on the other side of the breach like a limb he can no longer move. He has known psychic attacks, but this is not an attack. It is an environment. Storm entity, the Admiral says on the Vox, now tagged with one of Hydrofer's unpronounceable comscants. "Hydrofer names you Tidestrider until your true name is known. This is Admiral Vilka. I can direct 3 squadrons to your coordinates to mop up breaches." He could decline. He does not. Tidestrider accepts. "Tag the densest spores for me. Do not fire on the ocean if you can help it." The Inquisitor cuts in. "Do not take orders from a witch." "I am taking orders from physics," the Admiral says, and cuts her channel. He pulls a hurricane out of a day that did not have one, shapes it into a hoop, and tries not to think about how much debt he is acquiring. The trident hums a second hum. Lower. He pushes back the swarm. Then the sea drops. It drops because something with purpose and old victories decided it will. The horizon is off by an inch. The angle of every swell changes. Something with a spine of bone swords and a mind like a knife is in the water. The Swarm Lord arrives submerged, its ganglia sheathed in sealskin armor grown for salinity and pressure. It surfaces not as a triumph, but as a correction. It was engineered to defeat plans. It learns you and becomes the version of itself that kills you. It steps onto the harbor, water pouring off it like a curtain falling. Its eyes are holes burned in meat. It raises one saber and points at Arthur like a professor calling on a student. Arthur meets it before it finishes the gesture. The first exchange is not majestic. It is a slippery tangle of cuts and parries that make the air sweat. The trident rings against bone, carved from the memory of all the predators the galaxy ever made. The ring goes up his arms and becomes heat. The Swarm Lord feints low and hits high. A blade touches Arthur's shoulder just enough to write a letter of pain. Water answers him out of habit and loyalty. He throws the entire harbor sideways. The Swarm Lord's feet slurp on slick stone, but do not lose purchase. He drives it back with a spear of ice 5 meters wide. It splits the ice with the angle that would have killed him if it were him. He understands then that this is not a beast you outmuscle. This is a mind that fights like you, except it is not alone in there. It is a committee. It cages him in decisions. He falls back 2 steps and makes the water under its feet a vacuum pocket. It drops half an inch. Bone sabers create wind. He finds the sound between them and runs his trident through it like a musician finding a thread. The shadow in the warp does something new. It sings in a key directly opposite the clear. The song is hunger again, but now it has a shape. It offers him an optimization. Join this choir, and there is no loneliness. There is no rule to break, because there are no rules at all. He will never choose and never be wrong. No, he thinks. And the no costs blood. The trident's haft is suddenly heavy as history. He glances left and sees the city. People are watching. Hydrophor wears finery like armor and pretends it cannot starve. It can. This thing will teach it how. He pushes his own doubt down until it is a pebble he can stand on. He changes the temperature of the tide so quickly, the air between water and blade fogs into blindness. The Swarm Lord's saber passes where his ribs were. He jams the trident into the stone and calls the storm's heel down. Lightning lands in the same square yard 3 times. The Swarm Lord moves each time. A different solution. Always almost the right one. On the 4th, he does not strike lightning. He grabs the column of air the lightning ate and shoves it like a fist. Sound becomes a weapon. The Swarm Lord's cranial vents whistle. It slides. For a breath and a half, it is off balance. He pays for that moment by taking a saber along his forearm. The cut is lean and deep. His fingers go cold. The sea licks the wound, but the shadow makes the taste wrong. He hears whales crying in a register no human ear can code. Retreat, the Inquisitor says, not to him, to the Admiral. We must cut losses and quarantine. If this world falls, we must deny it to the swarm. Firestorm contingencies are on my writ. The Admiral's jaw turns to stone. She does not say yes. She does not say no. He does not retreat. He puts his hand in the ocean and pulls out a shape he has not used for a decade. Hard water. Articulated. A net that is also a cage. He wraps the Swarm Lord and himself in it, like a confession booth. It cuts itself out, and learns exactly how to do that. The next time, that trick will not work. He was not planning on there being a next time. He changes tactics. He stops trying to beat it alone. Listen, he tells Hydrophor like it is a person. You have Kraken nursery grounds you pretend are myths. Sing to them. Hydrophor, through its children and its pipework and its drowned saints, sings. The chord is ugly. It is full of rust. It is honest. The water heaves, and from somewhere under a rail track of deep, there rises a shape that is not a legend. It is a vertebrate question mark, as big as a basilica. It does not love anyone, but it loves pressure and the density that comes from things being full. It hates empty. Arthur does not command it. He asks. It answers by existing where the Swarm Lord is. The impact is a sermon. The Swarm Lord goes into the water with 2 of its sabers still in its hands, and 2 still in the air like failed prayers. He follows, and the ocean shuts above them like a lid. Underwater, he is home and not. The salt is wrong. The fauna are immigrants. The currents are mapped by accountants, not by tides. But it is water, and that is enough. He moves like an answer. Bone blades do not move less well underwater, only different. He makes the differences matter. He swirls eddies that become augers and digs the Swarm Lord down until the pressure treats it with equality. It does not mind. Of course, it does not mind. All environments are food. It cuts him again. The trident vibrates so hard his teeth sing. He does the one thing the swarm does not. He points the ocean at himself and binds his own blood. The sea scabs over his skin and keeps him from leaving too much of himself behind. The Swarm Lord notices that binding and goes for the joints at his wrist where the sea cannot reach. He smiles without humor. He lets go of one version of the trident grip, leverage, princely poise, and uses it like a harpoon. He pins the Swarm Lord's arm to a basalt tooth. The blade wrenches. The arm tears. The ocean eats a piece of hive mind and learns a note that is pure scream. He rises with what is left of his breath. He hits the surface and the city erupts in a good kind of noise. The kraken he asked goes back to the deep and forgets him according to its code. He respects that. The Swarm Lord climbs out farther down the harbor where no one can see, still alive, still learning, still coming. He feels that as a pressure on his back. He pretends to not feel it, so the city can have 10 seconds of hope that are not lies. War Council, the Admiral says. Now, the chamber is wood and brass stolen from shipwrecks and sanctified after. Maps hang like banners. The Inquisitor occupies a space that is not near anyone and makes it feel full. There are sisters in gray leather that is not leather. Their faces veiled, their minds like holes. There are tech priests who smell like soldering irons and old altars. There are seculars in dress blues with salt on their shoes. You will name yourself, the Inquisitor says. It is not a question, Arthur, he says. He does not add Curry or King or Atlantis. I am not your witch. I am not your enemy. That is the sort of thing a witch would say, she says. But it is a move, not a belief. You saved what you saved, the Admiral says. You did it under my guns, and I had a choice to turn those guns on you, and I did not. Therefore, we are cooperating. Arthur leans on the table without touching it. His arm is bound in strips of pressure skin, the medicae laced with sealant that feels like cold priesthood. Your ocean is already compromised, he says. They seeded it with catalytic enzymes that will let them drink faster. They're also thinking about you while I am talking. They always think about us, a young officer says. Too fast, and quiets under his own shame. You fought such things, the Inquisitor says. In other shapes, he says, and lets that answer hold. Your abilities, a tech priest clicks. You alter states of matter on a macro scale without obvious field emitters. You impose will upon emulsion, patience upon flood. You are either the largest localized collection of psychic phenomenon I have seen that is not a navigator, or something else. Something else, the Inquisitor says softly. Labels later, the Admiral says. We have a window to strike. She points with a baton that doubles as an oath rod. We run a counter-assault along the outer breakwaters. Battlefleet Hiercoleus will move into this wedge. Tidestrider Arthur forms the inner hinge. We cut their supply to the city and establish a kill lane. And when the smarter piece arrives? The Inquisitor asks, as if bored. He meets her eyes. It already has, he says. The big one with the knives is not your worst problem. The charts tremble. A cogitator hum changes pitch. A chorus of auspex returns, empties out like an inn shoved of all its chairs. Shadow intensity spike, an adept says. Meaning, unknown. Meaning we are under the eye of a Norn thing, the Inquisitor says. Or worse, something learned to play with us instead of at us. She looks at Arthur. You felt it. It tried to make me simpler, he says. The Inquisitor's lips move as if she is tasting that and finding it poisonous and sweet. It wants to bring you inside its moral geometry. That means you are significant to it. That makes you significant. To me, we will not burn the world, the Admiral says to her. Not while my fleet floats and my lungs work. We will burn it if we must, the Inquisitor says. And you will thank me if that is the cost that buys our species one more day. You both speak like you own the ocean, Arthur says, and the room holds its breath because his voice is a piece of weather now. It is older than your flags. You can kill it, yes. That is not the same. They look at him as if they can carve the tone out of the words and keep it in a reliquary. He lowers his chin. "We can win the harbor," he says. "We can turn the water column into a weapon they were not planning for. But the shadow will hurt everything that swims, or breathes vapors, or remembers salt. Our mercy will be different here." The Inquisitor nods once. "Define mercy," she says. "Evacuate what we can," he says. "Kill what we must. Spare what can live outside their net. Do not salt the earth, just to be tidy. The room is professionals. They do not clap. They write a plan on top of their old plans." The Admiral puts her hand on the baton, as if to swear not to die until after she is done. The alarm that interrupts is clean. "New signature," an Auspex adept says. "Not Tyranid. Not Imperial." The word pulses like a wound. "Necron." They come up from under the floor of the ocean, because the ocean has a floor, and it had tenants. Metallic geometries that glows with contempt. Blackstone constructs cut a wedge through the shadow, and do not care what else they cut. The water around the first monolith looks like it is remembering being air. "Of course," the Inquisitor says. "While the children feed, the old ones wake. And you, King of Tides, your tricks rely on frameworks made of thinking. Necron fields make thinking slow. I can still break waves," he says. "Their nulls make you a man with a spear," she says. Not unkindly. "That will have to be enough," the Admiral says. In love with none of this. Briefings and rituals fold into a single hour. He learns what a Blackstone fortress does when it is bored. He learns the names of 100 harbor districts because someone will need to weep accurately later. Sisters of Silence shuffle near him like snow that has decided to be dangerous. Their presence leaks pressure out of the room. His connection to things with gills thins to a whisper, and that whisper has to go around them to get to him. "We damp you, so we keep you," the Night Centura says. She has a voice like a cliff that let itself erode into beauty. "Stiffen your will. The shadow will come back with teeth. I was raised to fight in a pressure differential," he says. "I can work with this." She nods once. A warrior's amen. They go to war again. The first victory is smaller and heavier. He learns where not to try tricks under Blackstone shadow. He throws the sea in narrow pulses where null does not bite. He breaks the crest of a Tyranid wave and times the fall, so Imperial guns make punctuation. He aims whirlpools like slings. A Necron cryptek glides above the water on a platform that is more opinion than solid. It points an instrument at him that looks like a column of absences. He feels his mind slow at the edges. It is not a block. It is subtraction. It is the removal of permission. He charges anyway. He dives and comes up under the cryptek and uses the trident as a lever that hates math. He flips the platform. The cryptek slips the way a myth slips out of a child's hand and slides into the ocean. Its null dims. He drowns it as thoroughly as one can drown a thing that does not need to breathe by crushing it between two currents with a frequency that ruins molecular smugness. It breaks like a tiny, angry cathedral. The win costs him. The shadow comes back as if insulted by the lull. Its song finds the seams in his skull he did not know he had. It whispers in the language of currents. What if all your mercy is vanity? What if drowning quickly is the kindness you refuse to grant? What if this world belongs to teeth more than to breath? He pushes it out with the noise of seals and storms. He holds a harbor while the Admiral runs a fleet down the throat of a whale ship and parks it there and sets off charges and then reverses engines while praying that faith is a kind of physics. It almost is. They kill their way to a stalemate and call it a victory, so the civilians can sleep 2 hours. In the chapel hospital, he sits while a Medicae applies silver staples that are also prayers. The room smells like disinfectant over teak. The Inquisitor stands like a judgment you didn't ask for and have to live with. "You are bleeding warp," she says. "The storm you brought with you coats your bones like fat that should not be there. You will grow wrong unless someone burns the wrong out of you." "I have my own tides," he says. "Not here," she says. Not enough. I can order you culled. I am inclined to order you presented. Presented, he repeats, before the only authority that can decide the shape of mercy for a species, she says. Holy Terra. The throne. He looks at the Admiral. She looks back with eyes like steel gates. I will keep Hydrafor, she says. You go measure our soul. Not my empire, he says. You waded into it, the Inquisitor says. Now we will decide if you drown in it, or swim. He could leave. The breach he cut is not entirely closed. The clear calls in a way that feels like a home you left to grow. He stands. He says, I will go. Under escort. The Knight Centura says, pleased to have a verb she understands. And under null, until we are sure you keep your shape. The cruiser is a cathedral with engines. Geller fields whisper psalms that double as math. Custodians in gold move like lions choreographed by a drill sergeant. The Knight Centura sits across from him in a chapel lit only by a lumen shaped like an oath. A chaplain priest, with teeth like carved ivory maps, pain into parable, and tells him death is the tax you pay for breathing in a good war. Your power, the priest says. It thinks it is mercy. In our history, mercy always returns as a wolf with a different pelt. The sea eats and gives, Arthur says. It cleans by killing and feeds by breaking. It is not sentimental. You mistake sentiment for mercy. What would you spare? The Knight Centura asks. Children who can be taught to be different, he says. Creatures that can be moved without making room for worse creatures. Things that kill less than they make. That creed fails in a siege, the priest says. Then you live with the shame of the exceptions, he says. And you do not let the shame take your hands next time. He sleeps in a tank because the seals on his wounds and the warp burn itch are calmer when he is in water. He dreams of the clear, stretched over a galaxy, like a net with holes growing. He dreams of mouths pressed to faucets that run dry. The interception comes like music, a hymn that learned to rot. The Geller field shivers. Bells toll inside walls. The ship's stained glass breaks in a pattern that pictures a saint drowning with gratitude. Something swims through the immaterium and makes the corridor sweat. It enters the chapel as a tide of things, shaped like fish, that forgot the word for bone. They stink like a joy that turned putrid. Behind them, high on the arch of the nave, something pulls itself out of an idea, the drowned saint. A demon, not yet a prince, that wears vestments of kelp and corrosion. Its smile is a wound that healed badly. King of a soft sea, it says, and its voice is a flood over graves. Do you know how much easier it is to keep an ocean when rot loves you? Mercy is entropy with manners. Give me your trident, and I will give your worlds water that remembers every sin and forgives them by making them the same. Sisters of silence move. Their null is a wind that makes the demon squint like an old man. Custodians fall in like gates shutting. Arthur's strength is half on, half gagged by the null. That helps him not drown in what the demon is. He stands out of the tank and drips like an answer. He says nothing. He holds the trident at a lazy angle that insults kings. The first clash is theater. The demon inflates with drowned candles and collapsed choirs and tries to make the whole room water, then remembers the nulls and is anger, not law. Arthur is a blade that chooses. He uses the trident to cut the shapes of currents it did not invent. He hits the demon in the face with an undertow. He nails it to the deck with a pressure change that pops a dozen minor horrors like blisters. The sisters keep it from being a sacrament. The custodians keep it from being a massacre. The chaplain keeps it from being a farce by reciting a litany that offends chaos with its refusal to imagine beauty outside duty. The demon tries logic. You cannot win, it says. This empire you are buying into does not deserve the sea. Let my waters take them. Let me remember them. Let the tides be clean of their flags. Arthur spits salt and blood and wrong warp out. The ocean is not yours, he says. The astronomicon flares. The ship's spine shakes like it laughed and would rather not. The demon flinches as if someone cut its name out of a book. It withdraws with the dignity of a wave that refuses to admit the shore exists. Reach your throne, it says, with a hate that is almost love. Bargain your bargains. We will drown each other soon. The Geller field sows itself. The St. Glass winks out. The custodians repurpose their hatred into maintenance checks. The Knight Centura looks at Arthur and sees a man who did not take the easy rot. You will be judged, she says, as if that is a gift. Terra is not a planet. It is a sacrament you can refuse only once. They come down through machines that are buildings that are laws. The sky is gold because the light has nowhere else to be. The palace does not end. It just allows you to stop looking at it when you are tired. The procession is pageantry that doubled as security 3,000 years ago and never stopped. Custodians with armor that remembers better men. Blanks whose silence hushes rumors. Preachers who can weapons inspect your conscience. A million eyes on Auspex and more eyes hungry. He walks, dripping into a bowl carried by a novice who will tell this story at every cheap tavern they ever get drunk in. His arm glows with Medica script. His trident is hooded by a cloth that burns without flame. They do not speak before the throne. They kneel. They stand. They are reduced. The Emperor's face is a mask of gold that lies by telling only one truth. The quiet in the hall is engineered and profound. Only the machines sing. When the voice comes, it comes sideways. It is not a sound, but a verdict you catch. He feels it in the tininess of his cells and in the clear, which recognizes an older law and does not kneel, but inclines like a very stiff man does at a funeral. It shows him 3 paths, and the show is memory and prophecy at once. He sees himself go home, closing the breach, the clear taking him back and healing the warp rust in his bones as if it were just salt rubbed too hard. He remembers less each day, until Hydrophor is the name of a storm you only half recall. He wakes happy sometimes and hates himself for it 3 minutes a month. The children he saves there have never seen a hive spire. His hands stop shaking. The galaxy drowns without his name on it. The lesson he carried decays into a story he tells badly. He sees himself refuse all sanction. He moves through the Imperium like weather saving where he chooses, ignoring edicts, cutting armies off from a water supply because they are wicked this year, and kind next. Imperial Guard cheer him until the day they fire on him, because their colonel's catechism says, 2 cardinal worlds burn him in effigy, and in truth, if they can. He spares Xenos that deserve it, and dies loved by some, and reviled as a heretic by many. The galaxy is a chaos he chooses in, and his choosing is a second war. He sees himself take the oath. He becomes a word in a lexicon older than his seas. He swears to serve the species with definitions written by a man on a throne who has not breathed correctly in 10,000 years. He gets a sigil to wear next to his own, and a leash that is also a lifeline. He saves 1,000 worlds he will never touch by keeping alive the few ports they need to be themselves. His mercy is bounded, and therefore real. He hates half of it, and does it anyway. He dies in 200 years or 2 days, and his name becomes a cant with a kill count attached. The ocean in him learns the shape of bureaucracy, and bureaucracy learns a little of tide. None of the paths says right. All of them say cost. He stands there a long time in a room where time runs out first. He thinks about children like tides, and about kraken that do not love him, and therefore tell him the truth, and about a woman in black who would kill him without a cough if the balance said so, and about an admiral who chose to coordinate with a storm because her guns were not the only thing she owned. He says, I will take your sanction, on conditions. The room does not gasp. Rooms like this do not gasp. The Inquisitor's mouth almost smiles, and then remembers. Say your boundaries, the Emperor's voice says in the language in which boundaries were invented. My mercy will be explicit. he says. When I can, I spare non-sapient life and ecosystems that do not carry your enemies inside them. I will evacuate before I cleanse. I will not salt seas without need just because it looks decisive. I will not dam a river to make it easier to draw a map. In return, you will give me the authority to override local command when water is the battlefield and their plan is the firehammer. The voice does not push back like a tyrant. It grinds like an ocean does rocks. You will answer to Ordo Xenos on matters of contamination. You will wear the Aquila beside your mark. You will accept nulls when nulls must rule you. You will take a sister's hand off your throat only when she is wrong, and you can count the steps to prove it. That is a lot of hands, he says. That is a lot of throats, the voice says, almost a kindness. He kneels again. The trident is unhooded. Light runs up its length and writes older sigils next to new. His scale shirt takes on a whisper of gold not visible until you are kneeling. The Aquila does not replace the trident sigil. It crowns it like a gull sits on a prow it does not own. The Inquisitor steps into the air between them, as if that air were not already full of rules. Sanctioned, she says, with a weight that is not sarcasm. Agent of water, in the name of man. Protector title, the Knight Centura says, and taps his shoulder with the edge of her hand. It feels like a seal diving under him and becoming a grammar. The purge happens gently, liturgies that double as field dressings. A moment when 5 sisters surround him, and the world goes quiet enough. He hears the ocean beads of sweat on their palms, and knows they fought harder to be silent than most men did to roar. The wrong warp clinging to his bones burns without flame and does not scream. He keeps enough of it to remember what it felt like to be tempted. Rivals react the way weather does when a mountain moves. On Hydrafor, the Admiral stares at a fleet yard still standing and pays wages to widows, and writes letters to orphans, and orders a statue built not of him, but of a wall of water with a ship cradled in it, and tells the artist to make the wall look like it could have dropped the ship if it wanted. The Inquisitor files 3 reports. One goes to her Ordo and says asset acquired. Keep a blade handy. One goes to her conscience and says mercy exists. I have seen it weaponized properly. One she does not send and burns instead. It would have been easier to kill him, and we did not. And now we must live with a harder world and better odds. A swarm lord that learned too much chews on a bone of blackstone on a drowned world 2 systems away, and makes a plan for a man who uses water as a sword. It will not be surprised next time. It grows glands that make a hormone that tastes like pity, and will use that taste to lure this particular prey. A cryptek that died sends its data to a tomb that yawns awake and considers the notion of oceans as circuits. Machines that do not breathe remember suddenly that there were things under their feet that did not like being crushed. The drowned saint swims in the blind between worlds and laughs until it coughs up salt. It has a new enemy, and therefore a new reason to exist. Love and hate are the same element in that sea. In the deep of the clear, below the trench where his first decision wrote wake lines, something old opens one eye and nods once. The clear is not a god. It is a record that fights censorship with flood. It is glad one of its editors learned a new style guide. And from Terra, a sigil goes out 2-headed eagle sleeved over a trident, and a handful of worlds that thought water was background now have a name to call when flood is a weapon or a cure. Some will misuse it and be corrected. Some will whisper it wrong and be ignored. Some will die waiting because there are not enough heroes for the math. Arthur stands on a different cliff above a different ocean, armor humming with a commandment and a cost. He feels the leash and does not hate it because he can tug back. He feels the ocean like a choir that has been trained to fight in 3 keys at once. He breathes in. He tastes brass from Terra, and blood from Hydrafor, and rot from a thing that will come again, and the clean, flat taste of ice that will not break this year. He is a king, sanctioned to be a servant. He is a servant, licensed to be a storm. He steps forward and the sea rises to meet him. The symbol at his chest catches dawn and throws it in two directions at once, toward a galaxy that kills to live, and toward a tide that lives to refuse being tame. He returns to Hydrafor under a sky scraped clean by parade smoke and exhaust. The sigil on his breastplate trident under Aquila makes dock workers straighten like they just remembered their spines. The ocean recognizes him faster. It presses in, complaining and relieved. The Metis' stitch in his forearm itches with warp that is no longer wrong enough to own him. Admiral Vilka meets him on a pier that survived because he borrowed a miracle and paid it back in sweat. Her baton is scuffed. Her eyes are an inventory list with nothing missing. "Protector title," she says, tasting the title. "Welcome back to my problem." "Inquisitor?" he asks. "In 3 places at once, as usual," Vilka says. "Here, the fortress, and inside my conscience." She drafted your mercy clause into an order and attached 6 footnotes that read like knives. "I'll read them," he says. "You'll live them," she says, and inclines her head toward the harbor with a captain's tenderness. "We need a cleanse." He walks with her along a spine of stone stained by 1,000 years of salt. The water is glass where it should be froth. It has been taught stillness by fear. He kneels and lets the trident touch the surface. The touch is a treaty. "They seeded enzymes," he says, "and left signal spores like coins in a well. If we burn everything, you get numbers you can put on a victory column and a dead sea that breeds famine. Numbers are for payroll and funeral dues," Vilka says. "Not for this. Then we wring the shadow out of it without boiling the world," he says. "We draw it into cages and kill it inside shapes it thinks are food." Her comm bead clicks. "Engine sears are in position," a voice says. "Macro desalinators on piers 4 through 9. Grav pistons spooled and ready to pulse. Ecclesiarchal bell chimes tuned to 917 throne. Pulse them," Vilka orders. "On Protector's mark." Arthur looks up. Sisters of Silence stand spaced along the breakwaters like punctuation marks in a sentence that refuses to be misread. Their null is a halo of clean ake around each body. Between them, tech priests have bolted down bells whose bronze is mixed with reliquaries. The plan is ugly and good. He breathes. He speaks to currents in a grammar he didn't have last week. Now, the bells sing a note that has been taught to behave. Grav pistons shove the water in centimeters that travel like judgments. The trident draws lines between null fields and lays down lanes where shadow cannot sit. The ocean shakes like an animal shedding parasites. A slick climbs out of itself. It has no color and all colors. It gathers in rings he drags shoreward like nets. The Mechanicus-designed macro desalinators scream a hymn of vacuum. They drink the slick and spit steam that smells like deceit burning. A junior priest faints and is caught by a servitor with hands like hooks. "Spare the plankton," Arthur says through clenched teeth. "Shift intake cycles. 2 heartbeats open, 1 heartbeat shut. Let the small things live between. That will reduce efficacy." A tech adept crackles, offended on behalf of efficiency. "That will leave you food for tomorrow," Vilka says. "Do it." They do it. The bells keep singing until metal sweats. The water tastes like metal, then like nothing, then like itself. He weaves the lanes between sisters so that his power can flow, and theirs can keep him honest. The pain of their proximity is a price he pays, with an expression he learned from scarred men who didn't enjoy bleeding, but knew the bill came anyway. A shout from a far tower. Auspex returns clutter in a pattern Vilka's staff recognize as trouble before they name it. "Subsurface incursions," someone reports. "Multiple fast movers. Signature adapted. Not lictors. Not gaunts. Unknown." A vox cant like a sigh comes from Inquisitor Kestrel's channel. "They learned your lanes," she says. "Of course they did. All thinking predators love canals. Prepare for a kindness trap. The first civilians jump. They don't jump because they want to die. They jump because they feel a soft instruction in their hindbrain dressed as care. Come to the water. It will be quick. You will not suffer. Your children will not watch. The pity hormone the Swarm Lord grew just for him moves through the crowd like a rumor that tastes like relief. A woman squeezes a boy's hand and starts walking. The boy resists, but his shoes remember shorelines. A man with a bandaged eye steps over a rope because he dreams of drowning without sound. Pity attack, Arthur says, voice flat. Cut the vox. No command tones, only human noise. Vilka lifts a loudhailer and uses it like a bottle thrown at a wall. Hydrafer, she shouts, throat raw. Do not give my harbor more work. If you must be brave on land. If you must die, die where your widow can find you. It's not beautiful, it works. The pity tremor meets pride and embarrassment and cracks. Sisters move without touching anyone and create holes in crowds where panic can breathe. Ministorum priests chant the uglier litanies that talk about living long enough to earn a good death. Tech priests bang on bells because rhythm is a rope. Arthur makes cradles. He takes water and orders it into shapes of air wrapped in brine. Bubbles with skins like glass that hold their own. He pushes them along the lanes between nulls and parks them over the heads of the ones already in the water. They breathe in bubbles that don't pop. They cough and curse and live. The shadow tries to learn the bubble, takes a mouthful of brine, and finds it tastes like poison mapped to its tongue. A shape rises where the pity is thickest. Two sabers held in a posture he has seen on bone and in nightmares. The Swarm Lord does not leap. It stands. It wants to be seen. It wants to be believed. Protector, Vilka says, not asking. I see it, he says. He goes alone, because he is faster that way. He steps from pier to pier, with a rhythm that keeps the bells inside his bones. The sister's null brushes him, and drinks a layer of power he was not planning to spend. He accepts the hunger. They meet at the edge of a salvage yard, where anchors bigger than houses lie half buried in kelp. The Swarm Lord's blades whisper as if telling a joke about anatomy. Its crest bristles with glands like pearls that sweat pity. He smiles without warmth. I've met kings who tried to rule by kindness, he says. You wear it worse than they did. It comes in like a truth. Fast, accurate, nothing wasted. He fights like a tide that has learned to count. He does not throw the harbor this time. He turns small. He makes ankle-height currents that take a blade 1 centimeter low. He pushes salt hard through a gash that looks like a mouth. The Swarm Lord pivots and tries to write sorrow on his ribs. He answers with cavitation. He drives the trident into the water 3 times in quick succession in a triangle pattern. The third strike meets the bubbles left by the first 2, and they collapse like betrayed faith. The pressure drop is a knife without metal. It claws the armor plates on the Swarm Lord's chest and writes a message into the meat beneath. Not yours. The Swarm Lord learns. It shifts footwork into a set he has never met. It aims a blade not at him, but at the reflection of him. The water betrays him with honesty. He bleeds where he did not stand. He files that trick and keeps his feet. Vilka's voice cuts through, flatter than fear. Fleet is inside the whale, she says. Say when to close the throat. 2 breaths, he says. He takes 1. He takes the second as a promise and uses it as a feint. He drops his shoulder and shows the Swarm Lord a lie about weight. It takes the bait because it can be proud. He stabs the trident into the seam at the joint of its right arm. He shoves. The arm is not torn off this time. It is dislocated. The blade's line goes crooked. He sees not a beast, but a plane interrupted. Now, he says, and Vilka closes the throat. Battle fleet. Herculeus slams demolition charges on a bioduct the size of a basilica and reverses thrust. The whale ship tries to vomit. The charges demand that it swallow. It chokes on its own tide. A column of spawn that would have been a city dies in a garnish of steam. The pity hormones thicken, then thin, then die screaming in chemistry. The Swarm Lord recalculates extinction. It weighs vengeance against preservation. It chooses to live because it wants a second exam. It retreats like a gladiator who is paid by the season. He lets it go, because killing it here would not kill it for long, and because Vilka's fleet is now turning guns on a Necron monolith that is peeling up out of the deep like a tomb deciding to look around. Blackstone wedge in the South Channel, Kestrel says, calm like ice. Their null bites you. Leave it to science and hatred. Arthur does not leave. He can't. The null makes his power stutter. The trident's hum goes seeing eye dog faint. He adjusts scale. He uses hands. He swims. Necron scarabs pour like deceived coins out of the monolith's seams. He grabs an anchor chain thick as a thigh and swings it through the swarm. Scarabs burst in sprays of cold sparks. He shoves 3 servitor-punted demolition charges into a crack that isn't there until he makes it there by pushing pressure into a wedge. The monolith hums in a key like boredom. The charges sing a different key like blasphemy. The chord is pain. The wedge closes forever, but not before it coughs up a cryptek on a spear of black glass. The cryptek points a rod and tries to make the concept of water leave. For a heartbeat, the ocean around Arthur is an anecdote. He stares at the rod with a prince's anger. He does not try to force the water back. He breaks the rod's assumption about being unbreakable by hitting it where it meets its own shadow. The rod snaps like a law amended in midnight session. The cryptek falls into water that exists again and is very tired of being insulted. He drowns it without ceremony. The monolith decides it won't. It performs a translation that tastes like metal surrendering. It leaves behind geometry that will give cogitators nightmares. Silence. Bells wind down. People climb out of bubbles and cry without drowning. The ocean sags into itself like an old fighter after a good round. Vilka sits on a crate with her coat off and her shirt soaked and laughs once. It sounds like a gunshot that realized it wasn't pointed at anyone and relaxed. "Protector," she says, "write me a doctrine before you go to your next fire." "Doctrine?" he says. "Manual," she says. "Checklists. What to spare when. How to pulse bells without stripping a food chain. What kind of lies pity learns. I need something junior officers can hold when their hands are shaking." He thinks of the throne and the voice that did not forgive but understood. He thinks of Kestrel making footnotes sharper than knives. "I'll write it," he says. "You'll live it," Kestrel says, stepping out of a shadow that might have been a confession booth. Her hair is wet. Her rosette is not. "Then I will edit it, and the sisters will test it against their null, and the Mechanicus will add appendices that make the faithful swear. And then," he asks. "Then we will bind it to a promise," she says. "And we will break that promise when war demands and feel shame that doesn't stop our hands next time." He nods once, stone to stone. What next? Vilka does not look at charts. She looks at the horizon. "Shrine world of Eastus Sanct," she says. "Pilgrim aqueducts seeded with something that turns prayer water bitter. PDF reports blue-skinned raiders with glass knives siphoning hearts through pipes. Drukhari, with a sense of humor." Kestrel's mouth tightens. "They are taking souls through plumbing," she says. "The Mechanicus is offended. The ecclesiarchy is apoplectic. The pilgrims are dead. Drukhari like easy tubes," Vilka says. "You'll break their straws and spare the wells," Kestrel adds. A test. He smiles without warmth. "And spare the wells." Eastus Sanct is a bowl of stone scored with veins of water, designed by holy engineers who thought beauty and gravity should be friends. The raiders arrived as carnival shadows. They left chalices that make the first sip sweet, and the second one forever. They plumbed pain into fountains and called it art. He arrives at night because the sun would turn this into spectacle and give the Drukhari an audience. The aqueducts sing. The voices are wrong. He walks with a priest who forgets to look up because his city teaches him to look at spires. "Protector," the priest says. "They stole the taste of our water. Our people drink and then kneel to the idea of being empty. I'll change the taste," he says, "and break the straws." The Drukhari do not fight him like the swarm did. They do not stand. They glide and comment and cut. He makes the aqueduct slippery with a film that respects stone but hates razor boots. Raiders slide into nets he hung like polite suggestions. He flips siphon keys in midair, so the pumps that would have fed pain feed back into their own reservoirs. Screams come piping down from a pleasure barge moored to the sky by indecency. A hecatrix, with a blade that drinks reflection, lands on an arch and twirls it like a flirtatious lie. "King of tap water," she purrs. "Do you know what your mercy tastes like when it reaches the last cup?" "Like tomorrow," he says, and snap freezes the cup in her hand at the temperature of regret. Her fingers stick. She screams in a very educated way and falls. Kestrel's kill team moves through the city like punctuation, putting full stops where sentences got out of hand. Sisters hold null lines at choke points, so panic cannot become ritual. Arthur turns water back into itself. He leaves wells alone. He purges fountains that will kill. He opens cisterns that will live. He writes a doctrine in his head with verbs like spare and verbs like drown. By dawn, the raiders are gone, or naming him in a dialect that means appetitive insult. The pilgrims drink and just drink. The Ministorum tries to thank him with a relic he refuses on the grounds that he already carries enough antique arguments. "Next," Kestrel says softly, as if saying mercy too loudly might crack it. "Forge Moon Vire," Vilka says over Vox, her voice bright with fatigue. "Coolant oceans go green. Manufactoria corked. Tech priests tried boiling the entire hemisphere and only succeeded in making the cultists angrier. He goes because he is sanctioned. He goes because his symbol is now printed on 1,000 Navy pro plates and 100 guard canteens and 5 shrines basins. And those things make promises blind men can read. He goes because somewhere a swarm lord keeps an arm in a sling and plans his next pity. Vir is noise, heat, and the smell of labor turned religious. Its seas are not water, not entirely. He tastes ethylene glycol and prayers for teeth. He can work with that. He learns the viscosity's grammar in one breath and writes a poem out of it with the trident. He cools reactors without killing the algae that feeds the workforce. He flushes cultist toxins into culverts he then seals and sinks. He spares the crustaceans that have learned to eat iron. The Mechanicus thanks him by adding an appendix to his doctrine and stamping it with a cog. That means, "We will argue with you later in a room where we pretend to be calm." 3 worlds. 3 applications of the same oath. His bones hum with the work like after-hours bells. His wrong warp scar stays as a weather report. He keeps it. He returns to Hydrofor for an hour, no longer than a prayer. Vilka is there with maps like laundry on lines. Kestrel is there with laws like knives on tables. The Knight Centura is there with silence that feels like a hand steadying your back on a ladder. "Your doctrine," Vilka says, and he puts it on the table. It is not poetry. It is a checklist. It says, identify ecosystems, classify contamination, pulse, then test, spare what can breed food, kill what breeds enemies, evacuate before you cleanse. Never boil, because boiling is quick. And quickness is what cowards sell as mercy. It has diagrams that look like jaws taught by liturgy. It has footnotes Kestrel wrote in red that say, "In this case, ignore him." It has addenda the Mechanicus wrote in square script that say, "In this case, ignore us." The sisters' copy has empty margins. Their permission is their presence. He accepts that as benediction. On his way out, he looks up. The first prows with the Aquila trident crest cut the water like answers. Children on a dry step trace the shape with dirty fingers and argue about what it means. A fishmonger paints it on a sign because symbols that don't feed aren't worth paint. A pilgrim dips a hand into a basin stamped with it and does not die. Far off, something old wakes when Blackstone moves. Deeper far off, the drowned saint laughs and points toward a world made of canals and promises to meet him there with a smile. Closer, A swarm lord stretches an arm that remembers pivot points and asks a Norn queen for glands that secrete hope and despair in equal measure. The galaxy does not become kinder because a new sigil exists. It becomes more complicated, which is the same thing if you are stubborn and alive. He stands at the edge of another pier. Different city. Same sea doing its work. The armor he wears carries on it the aquila that is burden and legitimacy, and the trident that is promise and threat. He feels the leash and the tug, and he tugs back enough to remind it that storms negotiate poorly. "Protector," Kestrel says in his ear. Dry as ever, almost fond now. A canal world called Vera whispers your name in a drowning tone. "I hear it," he says. "Boundaries hold," she says. "Mercy explicit," he answers. "Operating Rule 7, Vilka cuts in. "Never let heroes skip breakfast." He almost smiles. He looks at the horizon that has never been a line so much as a suggestion. He steps. The ocean rises without asking permission, and he does not fault it for that, because some laws deserve to be old.